Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the East Naples Community Development Plan Workshop. This is the first of two public meetings where we can go ahead and present information as well as solicit public input. On behalf of the Commissioner's Office as well as county staff and the consultant team of Tyndale Oliver, who will be presenting remotely, we want to thank you for taking time out of your evening to participate in the workshop. My name is Michelle Mosca. I'm a principal planner with the county's community planning section. And I want to recognize Commissioner Fiala, District 1. She's here with us tonight and will say some brief comments as we move forward with the presentation. I'd also like to recognize we have some additional staff here tonight. Jeremy France is our Land Development Code Manager, as well as Anita Jenkins. She's our interim planning and zoning manager. And we'll also have staff from transportation planning, Michael Sawyer and Trinity Scott, and they'll assist with the question and answer portion of the program. Before handing over the microphone to Commissioner Fiala, we have just a few items that we need to address. For all of our on-site attendees, we have a speaker slip. If you wish to speak during the question and answer session, please fill out that slip and Jeremy will read off your names when we get to that point. Also, I encourage you to sign in and provide your email address so that if you want, we can add you to the distribution list. For all attendees joining us remotely, we'll have a dialogue box, questions, comments that can be submitted, and there'll be technical assistance if that's needed. And then finally, we have a recorded version of the workshop that'll be available on our webpage sometime later in the week. So with that, Commissioner Fiala, if you'd say a few comments, thank you.
Do I talk into this microphone?
Yes, please.
Well, welcome everybody. I understand there's about 150 of you out there signed up to participate in this workshop, and we're delighted to see that. That's just great. And at this time of year when people aren't even down here, that is wonderful. This has been a long awaited meeting, and it's only the beginning. From here on in, all we do is grow up and grow better. And so you're going to help us along the way. Thank you so much for being a part of this effort.
Tyndale Oliver staff, if you'll introduce yourselves, please, and we can start the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, my name is Allie Ankadovich. I'm with Tyndale Oliver, and I'm so pleased to be with you here tonight. On the call, we also have Steve Tyndale, Demian Miller, and Patrick Doherty. So you may hear them helping facilitate or chime in during the question and answer session. And we'll go ahead and jump into the presentation. I'm going to hide my webcam so you can see the full the presentation full screen. So we're going to jump right in here. A quick overview of what we'll be talking about tonight. For the preliminary analysis findings that you see listed there, we'll provide a recap of highlights, and then you can check out a more detailed recording and some other supplemental materials on these points on the project website, which I'll direct you to at the end of this workshop. So we'll have an overview, preliminary findings. We'll look at some of the survey responses that we've received so far and talk about some next steps. We'll also wrap up with a Q&A session at the end. And here you'll see the questions box that Michelle referenced earlier. You can type comments and questions in here if you're joining us virtually, and we plan to address those primarily at the end during that Q&A session. But we'll also be keeping an eye on this box just in case there are some common questions or things that need to be clarified that are popping up that we need to address before the end. And as Michelle mentioned, if at any point you are having technical difficulties, you can email ENCDP, as in East Naples Community Development Plan, at tyndaleoliver.com. and you can get some assistance that way with the platform. First, a quick overview. This planning effort expands on the area of focus from a study completed in 2018 on the US 41 corridor to include nearby neighborhoods in East Naples. The study area that you see there in orange for this project is used for running data and spatial analysis, and we're going to talk about that a little later on. But we're also accounting for elements such as major retail developments, roadway connections, and things like that in that surrounding area of influence you see there in the blue dotted line. The purpose of this plan focuses on establishing a community vision, and this will help guide future land uses and development in this area, encouraging desired uses, discouraging undesired uses. We'll also look at some options for commercial development and redevelopment, since outreach from that 2018 study I mentioned indicated a need for more desired businesses in this area. We'll inventory community assets and services and talk about some transportation options to connect all of these local destinations that we're going to be talking about here. We'll also document any other key themes that may come out of this process. A quick note on the schedule. We're at this first workshop that you see there at the end of June to review and discuss preliminary information from the backgrounds and needs assessment and some of those first survey results. The follow-up public meeting tentatively targeted for August or early September will provide an opportunity to review a draft plan. And as part of that, we'll summarize the information that we're talking about tonight, and then also provide some draft goals, recommendations, and concepts to help address the needs and issues that are identified from initial findings and public involvement. The Board of County Commission public approval meeting is an opportunity for information and comment on the finalized plan. You'll see that there, planned for October. Based on guidance from staff and the County Commission, we'll have some different options potentially for participating in those meetings, just so we can adhere to social distancing measures and make sure you get heard, but that everyone's also staying safe. So we certainly appreciate your patience as we've been adjusting the outreach and timing given the situation with coronavirus. Here are some of the key points of the information that we'll be providing tonight. If you get nothing else from this presentation, you'll see these vision themes come up throughout the findings and initial survey results. This idea of balanced development, making sure that's controlled, high quality, getting more of that diverse and quality commercial, but also maintaining good design, good looking appearances and green space, and also having some more transportation options for getting around. Some of the key findings related to these larger themes: this area generally has pretty good coverage of public assets and facilities. One thing we noted that might be a limitation in some ways is the roadway network, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And we've also found that this area is indeed underserved by non-residential uses. So to kind of look at what some of those uses might be and some of that desired commercial that I mentioned earlier, we're thinking there's going to be a strong focus on the US 41 corridor for some corridor commercial and nodes of commercial. We're also going to be talking about the preferred uses and design that have been identified through the previous outreach efforts and the outreach efforts as part of this project, as well as those preferred implementation options, which appear to be focusing around a marketing campaign and some incentive options. And then in terms of transportation, definitely hitting on the non-motorized connections and access. That's been a major theme that we've heard. Now I'll go into a little bit more detail on how we are approaching the community vision. And the vision really hinges on input that we get from you all. And we'll be providing some background information tonight and in these preliminary stages for your consideration. But ultimately, we want to hear what you have to say. We've put together an online survey, which many of you have taken, and we really appreciate your time with that. And I can direct you to that survey at the end of this workshop if you haven't had a chance to take it yet. Some of those key questions we're looking at What do you love about this area? How would you describe it now and what it should be in the future? And we're also incorporating stuff that we've heard from that 2018 US 41 corridor study that had a lot in terms of the physical environment and desired uses and activities. This provides just a quick overview of that 2018 study, but the complete study is available on the project website, and I'll show you that at the end. This slide shows the extent of the corridor on which that study focused, and it aimed to determine some preferences for future development types and uses in this area. Other themes included community branding, landscaping, architectural standards, and transportation, which certainly intersect with what we're doing. The findings from this study that we're kind of relying on were based on input and polling results from 3 stakeholder meetings and 3 public meetings. And our East Naples Community Development Plan will use these preferences as a starting point for a land use and development vision and some land use concepts in later stages of the project, and how we can kind of tailor those to the local East Naples context. So basically, we want to acknowledge with this that we're not starting from scratch here. Here are some key outcomes from that study that will inform our work. On the left there, you see desired uses to encourage, and you'll note a lot of businesses there, and we'll talk more on these later, so kind of tuck those away. And also some undesired uses to discourage, which we can certainly look into some separation design and other strategies to limit those in the area. The 2018 study also did what's called a visual preference survey as part of its outreach. And that's really trying to identify what preferred visuals could help characterize the desired type of development. So on the right there, you'll see a sample of some high-scoring visuals. There was an interest in a range from single-story to multi-story development, moderate multi-story, with an emphasis on setbacks from the roadway and also some strong landscaping. And as part of this, we're also noting some concerns of overbuilding or overcrowding that came out as part of our efforts that we're kind of integrating into this, and we'll touch on that more later. You can check out a full set of preferred visuals from the 2018 study as part of a recording that's on the project website, and as part of that 2018 study that's posted to the project website. Now we'll touch on some background and existing conditions. This helps reveal where the community's been, where it is currently, and steps that might be needed to get towards a desirable and attainable future. And 2 things we started with were looking at population and income. The study area has an estimated permanent population of about 50,000 people. So pretty sizable, and also a sizable median household income. So that's kind of a middle measure of the income for the area. And that's very comparable to the county, as you see listed there on the slide. However, what we found was that the study area may face some potential challenges in terms of some more specific population measures, such as population density and seasonal population changes. So in terms of densities, the study area does tend to have lower densities. This is pretty similar to what we see countywide. You'll see the green there for 4 persons per acre or below, so that characterizes much of this area. There's a few pockets that get to the 7 to 10 persons per acre range, but mostly it's kind of this low density areas. And interviews with representatives of the development community indicated that this lower density may be a limiting factor to support some additional desired commercial in the area, as discussed in the 2018 study. Another potential challenge is seasonal versus permanent population. So here you'll see some of our estimates on the permanent versus seasonal population. We think that's about a 40-60 split in East Naples. That's also very similar to the county as a whole. So this estimate suggests that there is a sizable number of seasonal households, and so while they can support local commercial uses in the area, they're only going to be doing so for part of the year. We also just looked generally at some residential characteristics in the area. And so what we're showing here is for housing values, estimated housing values by acre. And much of this study area has a sizable estimated value per acre. You see it's about 750,000 or higher in most of the area. And we just highlight this because measuring by acre in this way accounts for areas that might have a little bit higher density, maybe through smaller lot sizes or things like that. And we just want to note that this can support taxable value for local revenues, even if individual home values are lower. So the area is doing pretty good in this regard. Also wanted to highlight a little bit of the history of how this area has developed in terms of residential. So for single family homes, you'll see at the top left corner, 1960s and prior, a lot of those homes were going in along the US 41 corridor, more to the west of the study area. And you'll see as the decades progress that these homes have kind of traveled south down the corridor and over to the east. So you'll see that expansion over time. Note that about 60% of these single-family homes were built or significantly renovated in the 2000s or later, so they're probably in pretty good structural condition. I also mentioned that we would be looking at public assets, and this area has pretty good coverage in terms of those. One thing that we wanted to highlight in particular is roads and connections. So you'll see this map has those turquoise circles. Those show the intersections between local roads that provide access to the residential neighborhoods that are at the heart of the study area, and the major roads where much of commercial is located and those businesses. So these connection points are somewhat limited. And the upside of this is that it can kind of help buffer some of those residential areas. And on the other hand, it can also pose a challenge for people trying to access the shops and eateries and businesses from those neighborhoods. And it can also limit where new commercial can kind of go in. It's very likely going to go in along those corridors, as we'll talk about a little bit later. So as part of later stages of this plan, we're going to be evaluating options to make more connections for various transportation methods, including walking and biking and things like that. Now we'll talk a little bit more about the existing commercial business scene in East Naples. And as I mentioned, that 2018 study indicated there was a desire for some particular types of commercial and trying to attract those to the area. So we'll look at options to potentially do that in this next section. This slide really focuses on what's in the study area right now. And just to begin with, less than 10% of the project area is just any type of commercial to begin with. You'll see in the table below on the right that the categories that would capture some of those desired uses that I showed you earlier. So a lot of those are going to be captured in one-story retail or shopping centers. And as the map indicates, a lot of that's going to be located along that US 41 corridor. So this corridor is really a focal point for commercial that's there right now. Then we kind of wanted to think about, well, is the existing commercial a lot or a little? How does this kind of compare to some similar areas? So what we did here is we looked at the amount of square footage built by decade, and that's split into residential square footage that you see there in coral and non-residential square footage that you see there in green. So you'll see that for a long time, the amount of square footage for non-residential that would include some of these commercial uses we're talking about has been pretty low in terms of a percentage of square footage built overall. And so for this past decade, that amount has been about 11% of total square footage for non-residential, as opposed to 89% for residential. And so what we did was we said, okay, how does this compare to similar parts of the county that are in unincorporated county? And we found that the share for the past decade in those areas was closer to 15%. So this isn't to say that we're going to immediately shoot up to 15% as a target, but it does kind of provide a benchmark and a gauge. And it's possible to aim more for a 12 to 13% share of the non-residential square footage if we're focusing on those desired commercial uses that the community indicated it wanted in that 2018 study. And I just want to note this doesn't account for existing vacancies in existing structures. So just if someone's trying to get a tenant or something like that in an existing commercial building. So that's another opportunity there. So we used some of these benchmarks just to get a sense of how much additional square footage would be needed to get to that 12% mark or that 13% mark. So you see the benchmarks there on the left in terms of percentage. In that first yellow column on the left, you'll see the additional commercial square footage needed to get to that benchmark if that was desired. And then what we did on the right is just convert that to acreage. So how much acreage of commercial would be needed to hit those benchmarks, just to give us a sense of what we might be working with here in terms of targets. And just want to note that this build out would depend not only on what's desired by the community, but also just on market demand. And that's something that the county would be trying to influence with some of the approach to attracting more desired commercial development. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about two main approaches that could be used to get a little bit more commercial, a bit more of this desired commercial. And the first main way to do that is just to attract new development to vacant land. So this is land that would already be zoned and targeted for commercial uses or mixed use uses. And so you'll see that that's about 137% of acres are vacant commercial, and then 54 acres are vacant mixed use. And typically less than 10% of mixed use is actually used for commercial. The rest kind of goes to other uses. So if an approach was kind of made to build out these areas as intended, as they're kind of slated now, that would probably get you around that 12% mark. If you had a little uptick in allowed intensity and incentivized build out on that, say if you increase the intensity allowed by about a quarter, 25%, you'd get to that 13% mark. So this is just one way, one approach that you could do to getting to some additional commercial development. The second approach is to redevelop existing commercial. And so what we looked at here were what parcels did we think had the most likely commercial redevelopment opportunities. And so we based that on value, things that are typically below $1 million in value, and also size. So some parcels that are above an acre, so that they're low cost, but there's some land to work with. And as you'll see there noted on the map, a lot of these opportunities are along that US 41 corridor, very similar to what we saw with the vacant land that I showed in the previous slide. And there's two things to note with redevelopment. If you just redevelop with existing intensities and allowances, it's a great way to update structures and maybe attract some different types of uses. If the community was interested in getting some additional overall commercial, there would have to be some intensity added to increase the amount that's already there. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what we heard from the preliminary survey results, because we can lay out what we think is likely. We can lay out a few different approaches, but ultimately this really needs to be guided by some more specifics on what you want to see in terms of these aims, how much more commercial is really desired. And first, I just wanted to check in with Demian to see if we have any major points to clarify or questions before we move into the back half of the presentation here. Demian, was there anything we needed to clarify before moving on?
No, I think there were a couple questions about some technical issues that Ben has tried to contact people individually to work with. There's one or two questions that I've tried to respond to in the chat box. One person asked if they'd registered for this, would they automatically be set up for follow-up emails and things like that? And I confirmed that, yes, now we have your email address and you'll get all project updates. So that's one. And then we've got a couple of questions about the study area boundary, but I think we can probably reserve those for the discussion at the end. But in terms of—
Okay, great, thank you. So yeah, we can definitely circle back to those two as needed during the Q&A. And Demian, just wanted to mention you're a little fuzzy, so if there's any way you can speak clearer into the mic or something like that, that might be helpful.
Well, I haven't gotten a haircut.
So now we'll— Noted. So now we'll talk a little bit more about what we've heard from the survey results so far. And again, I can direct you to the survey at the end of this workshop if you haven't had a chance to take it yet. A few notes on the respondents who participated so far. We had 509 people at least open the survey and answer at least one question in it. Typically, the questions had at least 200 people answer, which is pretty good turnout for something like this. The strong majority of people taking the survey are part-time or full-time residents, so they live to some degree in this area for at least part of the year. 70% reported not going to work or to school. Nearly everybody who took the survey so far is older than 30, and nearly 60% are over 65. So this just gives some indications that potential, if people are in retirement age, if they're still commuting or not, and tries to account for some of those, give a little context to the responses. Again, just wanted to circle back to those vision themes that emerged, and I think a lot of this also emerged from some current characterizations of the study area. A lot of people found that it had a lot of potential and was underutilized, and had great access to a lot of the amenities in the broader area, like Naples and the beaches, but they were finding that maybe it was a little unattractive, low end, but some people really liked the affordability the relative affordability of the area. But I think people were also looking for some identity, some local flair, and kind of balancing any new development with nature and green space, and wanted to be mindful about overdeveloping or getting too congested. So that's a little bit more background on some of the vision questions that the survey opened with, and where these themes came from. We also had a few questions to get a little bit more detail on the issues related to businesses in the area. And to start with, most of the people taking the survey were pretty familiar with the businesses on US 41 and visited several times a week or more. The top 5 issues reported were quality, that design and aesthetics, mix of types, just a general type, and then the amount. So we're noting that it's not just about getting more or more of specific types. That's certainly a part of it, but also making sure it looks good and it's good quality. We also wanted to get a little bit more information on the priorities for business types. So we took the list of desirable businesses that were identified from the outreach in the 2018 study, and we asked as part of this survey, do you have any priorities in terms of this list? And when we asked you all to prioritize these uses, restaurants came out on top. So that was definitely something people wanted to see more of. And then you'll see that listed in rank order down the list, with hotels and motels coming in last in terms of the priority of these desirable uses. We also had some comments on some other uses that you see there on the right. Again, green space and preserving that was very important. I also just want to highlight this discussion in the comments that emerged between big box retailers like Target, Walmart, those sorts of things, and then smaller businesses. And it seemed like there was a pretty good support for both of those, having some more anchor retail that was very functional, but also some small local business that would maintain some character and kind of a unique identity for the area. We also want to get a little bit more information in terms of site preferences. So the first part of that is location. So we gave you a lot of input in terms of where we thought a lot of the likely development and redevelopment opportunities were. And based on where you thought we should look for these opportunities, it very much aligned with our findings. So most respondents thought US 41 was a good place to target. And then the two activity centers you see there are also along US 41, and then Collier Boulevard also seemed to be a pretty preferred place for new commercial. 66% of respondents preferred parking once in a cluster of establishments and walking among them. So again, getting at that theme of walkability and maybe having some more walkable concepts like an open mall. And again, as part of these site preferences, that idea of preserving land, having strong setbacks and landscaping also came up in those comments. This next part looks again at the tools available to implement some of these ideas. And so these are some of the things that we were kind of thinking about or that had been asked about previously. And it kind of starts with something like a marketing campaign, which is maybe a more modern approach. It's not requiring a lot of regulatory or site changes in the area. You may just be trying to tell a better story about the area and attract the kind of development that you're looking for. And then that graduates to some more robust approaches, trying to adjust what site requirements there are that might get at the building design or the landscaping requirements or parking requirements, things like that. Also looking at the amount of commercial development allowed. Again, as we talked about earlier, the option to potentially increase the intensity a little bit, maybe make the commercial lot depth bigger, and that's a whole discussion with abutting up against those residential neighborhoods that are right next to that commercial strip. And then also another option that's probably in that more robust realm is greater allowances of residential to support more of a market base for local commercial. Lastly, just highlighting some of those incentive options. These can be used on their own just to attract desired development within the given circumstances that exist now, or could be used to facilitate greater build out if more commercial or residential development was allowed. So here's what you all had to say about some of these. Some of these were asked about in the 2018 study, and based on those responses, the branding effort had the strongest support. 62% of respondents picked that one. There was moderate support as well for impact fee incentives to tear down, rebuild, redevelopment, and then also to have some overlay standards for building design. So kind of getting back to those site requirements. We included a question as well in our survey, and I just wanted to note that this particular question only allowed one option to be picked. So we understand that it was designed that way, and wanted to note that a number of people would have preferred to have been able to choose a bunch of options and kind of supported a mix of approaches, primarily a mix of incentives. So in terms of just the one preferred option, there wasn't a strong majority for any one tool, but the marketing campaign you see there came out on top, and a couple of those incentives, expedited permitting, fee reductions. I also wanted to note that there was some support for not pursuing any options to increase desired commercial uses. And so just to highlight some of the comments that might flesh that idea out a little bit, I think there were these concerns about overbuilding and overcrowding that I mentioned earlier. And then for the support for incentives, I think there was still very much a strong desire to maintain the aesthetics and design and not compromise those with the incentives. Also a comment to focus less on building any new or intensifying new residential and filling in the existing vacant lots. So I think this is emerging as a more modern approach in terms of those tools that we talked about earlier. We also had a few questions specifically on transportation. A majority of respondents thought that US 41 and those major roadways were indeed primarily for automobile traffic, but we're open to compromises to improve other ways of getting around and particularly also accessing those corridors. So it may not be just about putting a bike lane on US 41, but how could you get to US 41 and access it more easily if you were on a bike from the surrounding areas and that sort of thing. Again, walkability came up a lot and also managing traffic flow. We also wanted to hear about things not on the US 41 corridor because that it was emerging as such a strong component and focus of some of the other things we were looking into. I think a lot of these responses mirror what we heard in other parts of the survey. The amount of traffic, you know, managing cut-through traffic and things like that, making sure that the design and aesthetics looked good and keeping up that curb appeal, and then also managing the types of development, so not having those undesirable uses, gas stations and auto-oriented uses, storage uses in the area, or limiting them. Lastly, we also touched on public facilities and services. And so for this section of the survey, we asked whether a certain set of public services and facilities were satisfactory, and then whether they were unsatisfactory in terms of their provision. And so I'll start with just the fact that there wasn't a strong rating on any one of these facilities and services that indicated that there was a majority of people who thought they were satisfactory or a majority that thought any of these were unsatisfactory. So you'll see the categories there say more satisfactory, more unsatisfactory. And so on the left here, more satisfactory, meaning, you know, that there was relatively more people finding these as satisfactorily provided with a pretty low rating of unsatisfactory. And so you'll see those services and facilities listed there on the left. The opposite of that is on the right, more unsatisfactory. And that was primarily those non-auto pathways. And this very much aligns with some of the findings from the outreach from that 2018 study. So I think this validates a lot of what we had heard before. And then you'll see those services and facilities in the middle that didn't get a super strong rating either way. So now we'll just transition into our wrap up, and I just wanted to circle back to some of the key vision themes and takeaways, and hopefully this illuminated in a little bit more detail how we arrived at some of these general findings, and we can certainly discuss more of this or anything that may be missing during the Q&A section. Just a quick word on next steps. So you'll see on the left that we're in this public meeting number 1, and we've just gone over some of these preliminary findings. As I mentioned earlier, the next step is to create that draft plan. We'll summarize the findings we have here with your input, and then we'll start getting into some goals and recommendation options, getting at those transportation options, how some ideas for limiting those undesirable uses. And a big part of this too will be some draft land use concepts. So I just want to say a word on that. That'll involve some ideas for renderings, what some future development might look like based on the preferences that we've talked about here tonight. And that'll include some regulatory incentive options or things that would be needed
Ally, it sounds like you cut out there. So what we can do until you pop back in is maybe just move to some of the Q&A in the meantime. Let's see.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me, Damien?
I can hear you, Steve, but I think Ally's cut out. Maybe she can get in a second.
Yeah. I
But I guess,
go ahead and cover the contact and all that, and then we'll move to Q&A.
yeah. So the information here on the screen is the project website where you can get into it, and up here we've put the survey. There was a question earlier about would people register for the webinar be on the mail list, and you are, but if you've got someone else that would like to be engaged with this project by going to this webpage, you can add yourself to the project mailing list. We've got some other information about the project there as well. So I have an email address set up. If you have a question that maybe you didn't think of during this webinar or think of down the road, then you can send an email to this address, and someone from the project team will get back and respond to you. That is the end of the presentation. So I think the next thing we had was to answer some questions. I've gotten some questions from the chat as part of the webinar, but I wonder if the staff at the county commission chambers wants to unmute their mic, and if they have any folks there with questions or comments.
Thank you, Demian. Thank you, Demian. So I want to ask anyone, okay, if you'd use the middle podium. Thank you. Hi.
I'm Michelle Kelly, and I've been around here for a very long time. East Naples has always had, well, it hasn't had a very good connotation, following, and a lot of our homes from 41 down Rattlesnake towards Collier are lower income. A lot of the condos are lower income. And in the last, I'm going to say 7 years, I saw a lot of businesses go out of business. I think because the price point, understandably, Treviso Bay and the Isles have brought up the demographics of the area. Is it possible, and could there be a vote to perhaps call it Naples South and get rid of the East Naples branding, which has not really done it any justice? And having been around here since the 50s, although I was only 3, I have watched it from the time I was 16 growing up. And the nicer things are the boutique stores, the mom and pops. The box stores lend to just something that's more cold and not very homey. So if you call it Naples South, because that will get rid of East Naples, it just has never in my entire life brought up any visions of beautiful architecture, high level living, or people that really take, and I don't mean to be disparaging, but people that are just there. That's pretty much what I'm asking. And the one other question I have, is it possible, I mean, I don't know what you're going to do about all the condos that were built in the 80s, all those by the same builder. They're 30 some years old. While they can withstand the hurricanes and have done so, even without your Dade County upgrades, is there going to be anybody come along and offer us a pretty penny so that we can sell our houses and we can build prettier houses? I mean, you've got a whole area going towards Collier that's built in the 80s and some of them in the 60s. And so that's my question. Just bring up the demographics of the area so that you can make it worth your while for developing the corridor. so many businesses have gone out of business because nobody shops there. You have a consignment shop that couldn't even survive. That was on Rattlesnake. It's quite surprising. Anyway, those are my very humble questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone else in the board chambers? And then I'll ask Demian to respond. Do we have Ally back, Demian? Maybe she can, or someone can touch on the US 41 businesses.
Yeah, I think I can take a shot at it for now, and then hopefully Ally will rejoin us later. But I think you know, the person mentioned branding for the area and a sense of identity, and I think that's something that ultimately out of this project we want to try to work towards. Part of the data analysis that we try to show, I think, reflects the comment that there's sort of this range of newer and older development within the overall study area and along parts of the 41 corridor, and that's the challenge. We had a question earlier that in the webinar that had to do with, you guys are saying that we need to increase the availability of commercial and neighborhood serving retail properties, and yet we have a lot of vacant buildings out there today where the businesses have not been able to sustain themselves. And so one of the things that we were trying to, ultimately, I think at the center of this project, and we're not done yet, so I don't think we quite have the answer, is that on one hand, we can, based on the comments from the community and the data that we've measured, we can see that there's a relative lack of neighborhood serving retail uses in this area and services and things that the community can, patronize, shop at, whatever. But at the same time, we see data where we've got vacancy rates and things like that, suggesting that that the market is not entirely there to support those uses. Some of that may have to do with the overall market in the area, and may also have to do with how the existing retail is configured out there. Some of the questions we got back in the survey, that people would like to be able to park once and then maybe go do a couple, 3 different things rather than have to drive from place to place to place. And so some of it has to do with the market area, but other parts have to do with the way that those uses are configured and how to move that forward. I think another thing that's very obvious to us, whether you call it East Naples or South Naples or Naples South or whatever word, at the present time, this area is at the edge of the earth. There's not too much past it, and so it becomes the edge of a market area where normally, if you were to situate, whether it's a restaurant or a shop or an accountant, whatever it is, it's going to be surrounded by homes that can have customers to patronize. And when you're out at the edge like this, you don't have that overlapping support from your neighbors to drive business. Michelle, I've got, if there aren't other questions from the commission chambers, I've got a couple of questions that came in online that maybe the two of us collectively can kind of work through and answer.
Yes, Demian, go ahead.
Damian, I'd like to, one comment. We did have a meeting with the development community about the economics and the income of the area. The two things we got, we didn't get a sense that the income was down and there wasn't an income in the area. Their biggest issue was density, and that the people there spent maybe half their time in Naples, and they had a hard time putting a non-residential development together, and they had to rely on a combination of the energy of the roadways and the local economy to deal with their development cycle, and the lack of collector roads and the distribution of roads in this area is what's limiting their ability, and they're having to go on US 41. But I don't think I heard anything about the average income and the distribution being an issue with them. As more it was that the only place they can really develop is to use the average income in this area and the combination of the automobile along that corridor, and that was kind of the restricting development issue with the non-residential development.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Michelle, I had one question early on, which is more of a staff question, and the question is basically, has a study of stormwater management systems along US 41 been done to determine, to what extent the canal along there has the capacity to support existing commercial development? That may be one that we've got to come back and research and then add that answer to the notes for this. But I thought if anyone there did have some, maybe the transportation folks are there, so we can commit to answer that later, or we can, if somebody knows the answer, we can go ahead and put it out there.
Demian, let's commit to answer that later. We're hearing a little bit of feedback from your end, so it's difficult to understand exactly what you said. I heard US 41 roadway capacity, but let's commit to answer that later, and we'll post it on the webpage.
Okay, yeah, it was about the canal. Michelle, we had a couple different questions about the study area boundary. How was that boundary established? And my understanding was that was when the county's commission basically elected to move forward with this study. The understanding was that it was the commission district that would form the basis of the boundary, and then I guess we made a few tweaks since then. Would you like to comment on that at all?
Yes, generally the boundary does in fact follow commission district boundary, Commissioner Fiala's district. As we discussed, we went outside of that boundary and took in those other areas of influence. And what I have been telling individuals that if you are outside the core boundary as well as the area of influence, please go ahead and provide your input. We will continue to kind of cross districts and look at how the changes impact or affect other areas as well.
Okay. And
one more thing,
is
it Steve? If we could just make one more comment, Commissioner Fiala would like to comment on that. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you so much. You asked about district, but the thing is, our district, other people have heard me say this before, the East Naples area is made up of 3 commission districts, and there are parts of other districts as well. Like Commissioner Saunders, for instance, has all of the stuff along Radio Road, which is, of course, in East Naples. Commissioner Taylor has all of the Bayshore area. She has one side of the street on US 41 and the other side of the street on Davis Boulevard, but I live in the street in the middle, and that's all just East Naples, but they're counting that as commission districts. So it's hard to determine where we're really talking about, because we're talking about a strip of East Naples, not the whole East Naples at all. And so I think if you got the whole East Naples in there, it'd be much easier to determine then what you need to do. But you can't, because in the past, there were some things that went on that divided East Naples up. At one time, it was divided up into 5 commission districts. Now it's down to 3. But I think if you could solve that problem, you'd solve probably a really big problem, because then we would know what we really want to do, rather than a strip in the middle. Thank you.
Okay. I've got a headphone now. My fantastic IT person brought me one, so hopefully it's not fuzzy anymore.
Much better.
Thank you. And I've got another question that was boundary related, but also had to do with, are you contemplating Marco Island? And the comment is really an astute comment, more so than a question, that said, look, anything that you do to help provide better mixture of land use and things like that for the East Naples area will also benefit folks coming out of Marco that might stop there. So that's definitely something that we want to consider as sort of this sort of umbrella effect of improving conditions in this area. A couple of questions / comments about just the quality of the development along 41, upkeep of commercial businesses. Something that we've heard kind of throughout, but some of the comments thus far, and then also some of the things that came back on the survey. just ways to help encourage commercial property owners to keep up the properties, and maybe then that would have better outcomes for the businesses there. There's a comment related to the lack of U.S. post offices in the area, and so you know, and that really goes also to that sense of identity or sense of place as well. And let me see if there've been any new ones that have come in. Let's see. That's really the bulk of the questions so far, but there are a couple that just came in I've got to kind of go back and look at and try to digest. Oh, there's a question, or a comment rather. So far, I'm not seeing anything that indicates a vision or design moving forward. And I think the way we've set this whole project up is to first come in and get an understanding of what's out there. And that's both from a technical, quantitative perspective, and also hearing from the community. And today is a big part of that. And so as we go through and receive the feedback today, and then going forward from this, we'll move the study into a point where we'll start developing some strategies and recommendations moving forward. And then at that next workshop, we'll bring those back out to all of you and say, hey, this is what the data told us, this is what we heard. And based on those things, this is where we think we need to go. Does that make sense? Does that resonate with you? And so it's a fair critique that you're not seeing a vision yet, because we really needed to take a step back and listen before we could do that.
Yeah, Damien, I'll make a comment. We're trying to get a pretty good idea of both the mix of use and the quantity of use, and then the design and the makeup and the location will have a lot to do with creating critical mass and reshaping the vision of the community. But we didn't want to go out and create a vision that was overpowering, had the wrong uses, the wrong mix of uses, and that sense. So I think we got a sense of the flavor of the mix of uses and the quantity, and now we're going to go back through and try to create some value in terms of the design of it, what it looks like, and what it can become. And to be honest with you, I see this as a whole sub area of the whole county as an issue in terms of having a county that's tremendously supported by very high value residential development that has some development patterns that are pretty tough to deal with in terms of getting good mix of uses throughout the county, and then trying to create some incentives, some design, and some critical mass that will support this community. So I think we've got a lot of good feedback from the community, from the residents. We got some feedback from the people that would be asked to actually build within the area, the non-residential development. So I think we do have a lot of nice comments and some ideas about, you know, our next steps in terms of trying to create that quantity, but more so now moving forward is the quality and the design of it to try to create that critical mass. I did like the idea, at least in something we need to throw out, that if you're going to come up with a new vision, you got to decide whether you want to come up with a new name. I thought that was a pretty astute question about trying to rebrand the area, and that's something I guess we'll deal with, you know, the county commission and the group in terms of how they want to, if we're really going to rebrand this and show a new vision and a new design for the area, whether they want to come up with a new, you know, title for the area.
Yeah, and that comment has come up a couple times since, Steve, since it was first mentioned by the speaker at the commission chambers. And the idea that there's different connotations with the name there today. A couple of transportation related questions, status of a flyover at US 41 and Collier Boulevard, and then another one about any widening of 41, perhaps staff can respond to.
Well, I don't know the status of it. I thought they put a flyover in the long range plan. Somebody in the county have to suggest whether there's anything in any near future I'm not aware of.
Well, we'll come back to that. We'll provide answers to those questions in the notes along with the
right.
stormwater question.
Yeah,
Let's see.
real quick comment about stormwater. I know the county has a nice stormwater plan. They have some really competent people. And my guess is that the amount of impervious area that would be increased will not be the area, because most of the stuff's probably going to go up a little bit more than it is going to go way out. So I don't remember when we interviewed all the staff of hearing anything about at least, and this is mainly redevelopment. It's not a lot of massive new development. So I didn't hear anything when we were talking to the county staff, but we'll double check whether stormwater becomes a limiting factor, because we've checked all the utilities, water and sewer, but we'll go back and recheck the whole stormwater process and where they are with that with the receiving water to make sure what role it plays in the plan.
Sure. There are a few more comments that have come in recently, again, making sure that when we look at the study area, we do so holistically, just boundary questions and things like that. So we'll have to continue to make sure that we're thinking about that. And I guess I would say what we've talked about from the beginning here is that a lot of the strategies that come out of this project are transferable. So even if we look at one particular part of what's maybe the greater East Naples area, the type of strategies that apply will likely have portability both in the broader sense of East Naples, but also potentially other places within Collier County. There's a comment about the gas station from Hurricane Irma. That's been a little while, and so just what's going on with that. A comment that says, will the August meeting also be a webinar, because that would help people that are out of the area for the summer participate. I think it's anyone's guess right now what we'll be able to do come August, but regardless of whether or not we have a more in-person meeting, we can also double it up as a webinar as well, so that folks that are out for the season can participate. I think that may be one of the strange benefits of everything we're living through right now, is that it helps broaden public participation by making these things accessible from anywhere. And so that's absolutely something that we'll plan for. Let's see. Just a lot of good comments. I think we probably need to come back to a lot of these because they're very detailed, and just sit down with staff and craft written answers and provide those as part of the meeting follow-up. But comments about potential locations for post offices, some complaints about storage being built, which is something that we know has been an issue from the get-go with this. More comments about south versus east. Just a tremendous amount of great information coming through. Questions? Oh, go ahead.
We have a question here in the boardroom,
Sure.
if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, fantastic.
So if people are talking about renaming East Naples, are you talking about all 3 districts that are in East Naples? Or are you talking about one district? Now, if you're talking about District 1, it not only has already Isles of Capri and Goodland and Marco Island and let's see, not Everglades City, Copeland and so forth. So what in that district, what are you going to name East Naples, being that this place is chopped up into pieces? I don't think anybody has the answer. I just don't know what the answer would be.
Yeah, I think that's a complicated one, and you're absolutely right. We certainly don't have the answer today, and we've got a couple folks saying change it to South Naples, and another person saying we're not rebranding it. So anything that happens there, we'll have to have a pretty robust public process to make sure there's consensus and purpose behind it. But it's a fair statement that we certainly don't have an answer or from a staff level, a strong opinion about it at this point. That'll be part of the process going forward.
Yeah, I think we'll make a really good note of it. It sounded like to me that there's this pretty large geographic area called East Naples, and maybe there's sub areas or something we can at least talk to everybody about in terms of creating sub areas. But it sounded like to me we've got a lot of history here to overcome.
There's a question about, is there any update on the proposed FDOT toll road from Polk Collier to the Heartland Parkway, I guess. And as far as I know, the state's just moving along with their project development studies and their environmental studies. That's not something that the county is going to be a stakeholder in that process, but it's really a Florida Turnpike process. Comment here that that there's quite a bit of development being added, further to the east of Collier Boulevard, and as that comes online, it may start to change the market factors for our study area. More of a really astute comment than a question. County transportation staff has responded to a couple of the earlier transportation questions. The overpass is shown as a need in the 2040 long range plan, but wasn't presently funded, and that plan is currently being updated to 2045, so that may change. That's still in the planning process to update the long range plan for a 2045 forecast. But as of today, the flyover at US 41 and Collier Boulevard is not a funded improvement, but it's identified as a needed improvement. And then there's also a question about widening of 41, and the answer back from staff is that US 41 from Greenway Road to 6 lanes from Farm Road from 2 to 4 lanes is identified in the 2040 plan, cost feasible for construction, but it's not in the 5-year work program. So that's a longer term improvement, but it won't get underway within the next 5 years or so. More comments about branding. Just a ton of really sharp comments and a lot of information we'll be able to take back and work with going forward. But frankly, too much to read for everybody. Please don't make East Naples as crowded as Florida's East Coast. That's the last comment I've got so far.
It may be good to go back over the schedule one more time to remind everybody the next meeting. Do you have the date on that, Damien?
Let me see if I can pull that up.
I don't think there's a firm absolute date, but we have a time period I think that we're shooting for to have that second. That means I think it was right near the original part of the presentation. There it was.
There it was. All right, so here we are towards the end of June. We're going to take all this input and also provide written comments back to the group that attended, and then really sharpen our pencils and try to get to work in July and August to develop concepts, and then bring that back as we have some draft concepts, bring that back to another public workshop towards the end of August or early September. And then based on what we hear then, we'll work to finalize the plan and then bring that to the county commissioners, most likely in October. So about two months hence, we'll be back with everything we heard and and some preliminary conclusions, and then take that feedback to develop a final set of recommendations.
I guess one thing I'd like to leave with the group when they come back is that we really searched up and down Rattlesnake, and we looked on 951 Collier Boulevard, everything, and we couldn't find any other mixed use land masses out there other than US 41. So if anybody's got any ideas about sites, intersections, or nodes that they would like to feed back to us that they think would be appropriate for non-residential development, I think that would be a nice thing to get from anybody who would like to participate in those comments. But I think we've covered pretty well everything, and we got a lot of good comments. So
Just a ton of fantastic comments and some very specific questions that I'd really like to be able to sit down and go over with staff and then respond to in writing or do some follow-up calls.
Right.
Demian, would you go to the final slide so that everyone can see the web page as well as the email address?
Yep, we'll get there.
I'd like to encourage everyone to visit our webpage. If you have not already filled out the survey, if you take some time to fill out as many questions as you possibly can, we'd really appreciate that. I believe we're going to hold that survey open for another couple weeks, and then we can get that additional feedback. If there's areas of the survey you'd like to add additional comments, if you go to the end of the survey and fill in one of the blank boxes, or if you have questions about the survey or need additional assistance, if you could go ahead and reach out to us by email at encdp@colliercountyfl.gov. We'd be happy to assist you to go through the survey as well.
Okay, I know Allie's not here to wrap it up, but I think we've covered everything. I think we've got some really good information. I hope everybody's seen that we've really put a lot of effort in identifying the services, the infrastructure, the whole area. We have tried to expand the area in terms of its edges and consider the surrounding area. I do believe we have at least an understanding what the issues are. We have some ideas of some suggestions and recommendations, and what we hope to do is in our next meeting is actually show you some visions and some visuals and some options and processes that you'll feel like that we've actually created something here of substance for you. Our whole goal here is to take you where you are now and have you have a sense that at least as the future goes along, things will change and you'll see some new ideas and things going on within this area. So that's our goal. I think we've got enough understanding the issues. The solutions aren't really simple, but I think we've got some creative ideas that we're going to bring back to you, and we really look forward to everybody's participation at the next meeting.
Yep.
Don't know if county staff wanted to say anything to wrap it up. Is that pretty well covered?
Thanks, Steve. Yes, you pretty well covered everything. Again, take that opportunity, encourage you to go to the designated webpage for the project. If you have additional comments, you didn't have an opportunity to submit comments or suggestions, please go ahead and submit them through our email, and we'll be happy to respond. I think it was either you, Steve, or Demian said we'll have a summary of these, of the meeting. So any questions that are still left out there, we could answer those as well.
Yeah, and there were a ton. Some of them are just very, very specific. And so I think we can come back and provide those specific answers.
One other quick comment that I guess forget all about it. When they mentioned something about the East Naples, one thing we tried to do is show you that East Naples is not, it doesn't bear a whole lot of difference than the rest of the county. Your range of income, the range of density, and the makeup of East Naples, from what we saw of all the demographics and information, I think shows that maybe there's a complex there. But I can tell you from what we can see, I think it's probably in better shape than maybe people feel like it is. And what we're going to do is just make it even better.
And the end result with the community plan, that should reflect all of that information.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope we can show them who they are and how they compare, and they're, you know, there are some things that definitely can be improved, but it's a pretty nice place and a pretty good mix and diverse development compared to the rest of the county. And what we're going to do is just make it better. So that's our goal for our next meeting.
All right.
All right. Well,
Thank
everybody
you all
have a
very
good
much.
evening. All right.
Yep.
Thank you.